The most successful coaches never stop learning. They are committed to their personal growth and making themselves better. I'm Colby Donovan, and welcome to the Coaching Coaches Podcast. I'll speak with the world's most respected coaches, best-selling authors, and top business leaders to give you insight into their philosophies, lessons, and mindsets for you to apply to your own life. Head on over to coachingcoaches.co, where you can subscribe to this podcast and join some of the top coaches around the country who also enjoy our regular newsletter. My guest today is Tim Corbin, the head baseball coach at Vanderbilt University. Coach Corbin has built Vanderbilt into one of the most prominent programs in college baseball, making the College World Series 4 times and winning the national championship in both 2014 and 2019. He's also coached 15 players at Vanderbilt who ended up being selected in the first round of the Major League Baseball draft, including names like David Price, Sonny Gray, and Walker Buehler. In this episode, we learn why he chose to have Vanderbilt become the first college baseball program to build an alumni locker room, classroom, and nutrition center. We also discuss why he doesn't believe in goals, what he looks for when recruiting players, and his relationship with other elite coaches, including Penn State football coach James Franklin. Finally, we hear how he endured the tragic death of Vanderbilt freshman and former first-round draft pick Donnie Everett in 2016, right before the postseason, and what he learned about grief and resiliency from that experience. Please enjoy the episode. So, Coach, you're hired at Vanderbilt in 2003. Can you give some background on where the program was at that point and what were the things you focused on early in your time there?
I didn't really know much of Vanderbilt, to be honest with you, because we had never played them when I was at Clemson. So I just knew that they were an SEC program. It was a tremendous school. I knew the gentleman that coached him, Roy Mewborn, and he's just a fantastic guy in every way. He's so supportive of myself and the program, even after he retired. But he was also a guy that at the university at the time, it wasn't like they gave him many resources. Actually, what he did is he raised money to help build the stadium. And then once he got the stadium built, then he essentially handed it off to the new coach, which was me. So I'm grateful for that. But I think I just came in and it wasn't, I hear so many coaches talk about when they come into a situation about the culture, and, I'm a step parent. So I know what it's like to come into a new family. And for me, it was more about blending my personality into this family and just trying to build the standards and the values and the expectations of what I thought was that of a competitive program. And that's what we just started to do.
And what are some of the standards and values you focus on with your guys back then and to this day?
It's not really too much that has changed from that vantage point. I think it's just trying to do things at a high level, emotionally, physically, academically, socially. I think in every regard, we're just trying to do things at a very high level with a high level of care. And beyond that is, there's not much control over anything else. So we really try to focus our attention on what we're doing at that time and at that moment. And, I don't have any rules. I'm not a big believer in rules. I'm just a big believer in standards and doing things at a level. I think rules are for people who can't follow direction. I think standards are for people who aspire to do special things. And I think that's really what we have inside the program is just a level of standards and a level of care for which you're doing something and leaving it in a better place than how you found it. And that could be any activity of the day.
And I would say, in trying to learn as much as I could about you before the episode, it sounds like a lot of your guys do that. And I know in 2016, you had a big fundraiser for the baseball facilities, and I was reading about the fact that I think about 60% of your former players actually contributed to that fundraiser when the national average is about 2 to 3% of former players contribute. Why do you think so many of your former players contributed to that and were focused on, like you said, leaving Vanderbilt baseball in a better place than it was when they got there?
Well, I think it's because of the experience. I think it's because of the experience that they had, and it became emotional to them. And because it became emotional, much like any philanthropic venture that you decide to involve yourself in, it the only reason you would give to anything is because you feel like you have an emotional energy towards it. You're attracted by it, and I just feel like many of those kids it wasn't like I was knocking on the door with them. I think as a coach, you're much like a dad. You don't want to knock on your kid's door and ask them for money. And I just wasn't going to do that. I'll let development people do that, but I'm not going to do it. I think I've always felt like, and we talk about philanthropy inside of our program and what it means to give back. And I don't talk about giving back to our situation. I talk about other situations that they feel emotional about, whether it's an illness or whether it's some type of group that they want to support. And we talk about how that occurs and why you decide to venture in that. So I just feel like the group of kids that we had they're very immersed in the culture here. They enjoyed it, and it's just something that we're very grateful for. And I don't take that for granted. I realize how difficult it is for athletes to give back. So the kids that we have are special for wanting to do that because they see it as helping the people after them, and that takes a lot of care and a lot of thought to do something like that.
Yeah, that's really special. So you were the first program to build three things: an alumni locker room, a classroom, and a nutrition center. What was the idea behind all three of those, and why was that important to you to have?
I just wanted to be like a home. I felt like if it was something in which the kids could be here, they could use it, they would want to be here because it just had everything that they wanted. If they could open a refrigerator, they could get something to eat. If they wanted to make something, they could do it. If they wanted to, if you're an older player that no longer played here, I wanted them to have their own bed again, so to speak. I just wanted them to have their own room where they could come back and work out again and not have to spend money and resources to try to find that. So I've always felt like this is something that it's developmental in nature. It just has everything that they need inside of it. It's not extravagant. I wouldn't tell you that, the Stadium Colby is over the top. It's not. It's not like your former school right now. Sully's got a beautiful stadium. Ours is nice. It's quaint, but, it doesn't seat 10,000 people. It seats, a solid amount of people. But what we do have is we have very nice internal facilities for the players. And I thought that was the most important thing. If you're going to have kids in your family and a program, then just make sure that they have all the resources they need in order to get better. The classroom was something I've always believed in because we basically are at a teaching university and a high-level private school. And I just felt like the ability to center the kids before we go out on the field every day was a way to get information across to them, whether it be baseball or whether it be brushing their teeth, just a way to convey information to them. And then when they go to the field, that became their playground. And I just felt like it empowered them to want to go to the field after they heard whatever they heard inside the classroom environment. So it's just kind of splitting environments more than anything else.
And then talk to me more about the nutrition aspect of it. Is that just so there's some resources for them in the facility, or are there certain things you focus on having there? Is there a nutritionist around to help them?
Yeah, we do have a nutritionist. I just feel like, again, it's a life skill. I think it, beyond playing baseball here, it will serve them moving forward. But I think for their time here, it's just understanding that building strength is in the weight room, building muscles is in the kitchen. And just for them to look at food and sleep as being a steroid. If you want your body to grow, if you want your body to take off, if you want to put the right gasoline in your car, then you need to be very aware of sleep. You need to be very aware of rest. and you need to be very aware of what you're putting inside of your car. And I just wanted them to look at nutritional wrappers and just general food as being their source of strength and gaining strength. So we made food kind of one of those fun things where you see it as, okay, I'm actually helping my body, but this actually tastes well, and I know what it tastes good, and I know what it's doing for my body, and it's producing more strength. So I think it's just building an awareness of what's good for their body and what isn't good for their body. And because really there's more decisions that you make that send you down different roads than the right decisions you make. And I think it's trying to alleviate the poor decisions and trying to get them to make better decisions about what they're putting inside their body and how they're resting it.
Talk to me about how it is to recruit at Vanderbilt. Obviously, you've established yourself as one of the top programs in the country, so that provides an opportunity to go into any family's living room and speak to the young man and their family about what you guys can offer them. But also, you're an elite academic institution that has requirements that maybe some other schools don't. So I imagine that's a balance you have to think about over time.
It is, but I think what you start doing, Colby, is you start centering in on kids that want that. You start to get an idea. I think at first, I've always, especially being at Clemson for 9 years and having coached there and a recruiter there, that's how I looked at the process of attracting players. It was more recruiting. I think now it's more about fit. I think it's about trying to find the right fit for the university, and not necessarily the very best player. It's more about finding a skilled player mentally and physically that will merge with harmony once they get here. Otherwise, you're trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. So we want to try to avoid that. We want to try to make this a situation where, okay, we're recruiting the right person because that person really respects the academic environment and they really respect time. I think when you find someone who's really bright and sharp and smart, they're paying attention to the 24-hour day. They look at the clock a little bit differently than most kids. Most kids will look at the clock and say, there's endless time. I've got as much time as I need. And you and I both know we're older. That's not the case. Time matters, and how you utilize time matters. And I think that for me, it's a fit to find that kid. The private school education and the private school mindset to me is something that is very attractive. I want kids who want to be good in both levels, both academically and athletically. So I think from that vantage point, it's a little bit easier now to try to find that kid than it was maybe when I first started, because the net was wide. This one now it's kind of a smaller net, and we kind of have a focus on what we want to attract.
And when you're going through the recruiting process and you're watching guys play in games and practices, you're talking to them and their family, what sort of things are you looking for to tease out that they are that fit that you're talking about?
Well, I think the first thing's visible, and I think that's how they treat others around them, whether it's their teammates or how they treat their mom or how they treat their dad. And oftentimes you sit there and have a conversation with a kid and he's saying something, and all of a sudden the mother or the dad will blurt something out. And I think if you're really if you're one of those kids that's respectful and loving of your parents, you might say, mom or dad just blurted something out. And then there's another kid who will just roll his eyes and just shake his head, and almost as if to say, I just wish she would keep her mouth shut. You get that feeling and you get that presence from a kid who really respects his mom and dad, who really respects his coaches, who really respects his teachers. And more times than not, Colby, it's something that you can see. I think it's very visible. So I would say that's one quality. And I think the other quality is how kids talk about the teams they're on. If they're continually a we type of person, you're going to get that language. That language is going to come out. That verbiage is going to come out at some point when a young man only focuses on things on what he's doing, how he's doing it, and can only talk about what he's doing and really not talk about anything else. Then you're going to get that things aren't going to change. I mean, the cement's dry. that's going to be in place. So I really think it's someone who thinks uniquely about other things and other people more so than they think about themselves, but yet still have that selfish but unselfish quality to be very good at what they do. And I say selfish because in order to be really, really good at something, you have to invest a lot of time into it. And that's your time. So I think it's just a fine mix, and you can't expect perfection out of every kid. And I realize there's 17, and I was 17, 18 and immature at some points too. But I think we're trying to find that kid who has a little bit more maturity.
How do you've had, I was looking at the list of players who've gone to the major leagues from your program, and it's just a laundry list of who's who: David Price, Sonny Gray, so on and so forth. What's the different maturation process of guys that you've had? I imagine that some come in and are just ready to go and contribute right away and have that mentality that they need, and others, I'm sure it takes a little bit longer.
Well, it does. And I think that's where you start separating players in general, or student athletes in general. They're not all the same, and you can't expect that they're all going to be the same. And that's fine. I think as long as they're willing to modify, as long as they're willing to understand and be aware of the areas that they still need to grow, I think that's all you're asking of a kid. You can't expect a kid to come in here at 18 years old and have everything down pat. There are some kids who are very mature. There are some kids that are very gifted when it comes to using the clock. But then there's the other kids that will let time get away from them, and they just need some guidance. But I think that's what we're here for. We're here to clean them up a little bit. And if they do go down Fool's Hill and they do make some decisions that don't help them, then we can pick them back up again, wipe them off, and just get them right back out there again. And hopefully they learn from their decisions. But I think they understand that every choice has a consequence, and those consequences have outcomes. And I think when it gets down to it, it's just trying to help them with those decision-making processes they have during the course of the day. And the decisions are very small in nature, but they lead to more positive outcomes during the afternoon at night if you do them well.
What do you think is the difference with some of the elite players you've had, besides the physical tools, which I think we all know that there's that 1% of guys that are just built differently physically. But what do you think is the difference between the best guys you've had and those who didn't quite reach their full potential while at Vandy?
High believability. I think the kids that have come in here as young kids, and you could take a look at him and say, he's going to play well beyond here. Those are the kids that have high believability and are very competitive. They're ultra competitive. You know, the alphas, they're just different. I think the kids that are just love competition, crave competition, move towards competition, don't care what boundaries are, and believe in what they're going to do. I just think those are the difference makers there. To a man, and I'm not trying to overstate this, but if you gave me David Price, Sonny Gray, Walker Buehler, Austin Martin, it could be any, Mikey Minor, any of the great ones that we've had here, I don't think they would have cared who you recruited, what you recruited next to them. That would never be on their mind. It's like, I don't care who you have, I'm going to pitch. I don't care who you have, I'm going to hit third. You know, it's that thought process of a player that I'm there because I'm going to be a very good player. And then there's other kids that probably want to have a map or a road carved out for them ahead of time. And I just think the real good ones, they just know, they believe in themselves.
How do you balance as a coach? You've got 35 players on your team. I'm sure there are a lot of guys on your team who feel that way about themselves, but maybe they're not at the point in their career. Maybe they're a freshman, sophomore, and there are guys ahead of them who are going to be a first-round draft pick and are just going to play because that's what it is. How do you handle making sure that they are staying motivated and continue to grow, but also put the team before themselves at the end of the day?
Yeah, that's why I use the classroom to discuss topics like that and to bring out points like that. For this program, you have a playing role and a team role. And if you think about your team, Colby, if you've got 40 players and let's just say 9 are playing, then really it's like 20% are playing, 80% are not, whatever that percentage is, but it's a high percentage of kids that are not. So those kids are sitting at the dinner table and watching the other kids eat, and they're not going to touch the food. So you've to, in some way, shape or form, explain to a young man how separating, okay, I'm not playing, but yet in the team because I'm serving a team role, and understanding what a team role looks like, what it is. Because the reality is everyone at some point in time is going to serve a team role and not be in a playing role. And I think just to understand what that team role is, what it encompasses, how it creates positive energy, how that energy is multiplied once you start getting into a playing role. I think understanding all of those things allow a young man who's not playing understand patience and understand growth, because that reality of growth and patience needs to exist in someone in order for a player to be able to play. And sometimes it takes months, sometimes it takes a year, 2 years, 3 years. Each kid's different and each kid runs his own race. But I just think it's identifying those moments right there and explaining them to a kid so he knows what they look like.
If you enjoy this podcast, I also write a weekly newsletter sharing the best content I found in the last week that directly applies to coaches. Some of the best coaches in the world subscribe, and it's free. So go to coachingcoaches.substack.com or check out the link in the show notes to subscribe. Once again, that's coachingcoaches.substack.com. Let's get back to the episode. Talk to me about the motto or slogan Vandy Boys and where that came from.
Well, I think it came years ago, right about 2010, 2011. We had a group of older players, and they came up with the mantra of Vandy Boys. And when I heard it the first time, I didn't like it. I just said, I'm not really liking that. But it just seemed to hang on for whatever reason. And they just called themselves Vandy Boys, whether you were a former player or whether you were a current player. When Donnie Everett died back in 2016, before the 2016 regional, I had to speak at his service. And it just came to me, a couple of days before the service when I was writing down notes. I started thinking about Vandy Boy and actually what that meant. And then that's when I started to write down a definition of what it was and how it was more of a giving personality, and it was a protector of an environment, a protector of a culture that was building it, and then learn how to take care of it after he built it. And then it just became a thing for me. Then I said, I like this. It kind of is us. It explains who we are. And, I'll always be thankful to, I think it was Mark Lamb and a bunch of other players that came up with it. But as I said, Colby, I didn't really care for it right away. But now when I look at it, I'm very prideful of it because I see it. I think now it's just making sure that when a new kid comes in here, he understands exactly what it is. And some of them do before they get here because they've studied it. But I'm very fond of it now.
Do you think it's important for programs to kind of have slogans or phrases on walls and all over the facilities that they're constantly hearing so the players kind of know what the culture is as long as those words are defined? Or you think this just kind of developed naturally and isn't necessary if you're somewhere else?
Well, I don't care for them. I mean, we've got a couple things on the wall, but I'm not one who wants to write down quotes and put them on a wall and hope that the players absorb them. I would rather teach that in a classroom environment so they understand what it is. I think a lot of, I think it's much like a home, Colby. I think, you and I grew up in homes, and, Dad never had slogans written anywhere in the home. You had pictures on the wall, but you had pictures of the wall of your family or things that was meaningful to you. And I think that's really what we have in here. We've got pictures on the wall, but they're nothing where I think we bang our chest and say, we've got this, we've done this. I don't actually enjoy that either. Now, I know some of it comes out in social media and so on, but at the same time, I just want the players to understand that what they have when they get here is something that they haven't done to earn that yet. Other players have. And even if they've been part of it, now they're a completely different player in terms of, for instance, 2019, you had a national championship team, and you had several kids come back for that 2020 team, but they were a completely different team. It's a completely different kid. That was 12 months removed. So I just think everything changes, and whatever you do inside the program is something that, is new to you and different to you. So yeah, I'm not much for quotes on walls. I would rather talk about that and explain it.
Do you try to make goals for your players, either individually or as a team?
No, I no goals. I think, if there is a goal, it's just about what you're doing at the moment and what you're doing, today. I think the goal of just getting a little bit better is big enough for them. I think it's not that I dislike goals. I just think a lot of times goals set up expectations. And I just think expectations get us in trouble sometimes, in terms of we expect something's going to happen because we did it this way. And so much of this game is so tricky with baseball, and it's really on its own watch, that we don't have control of it. Colby, you've talked to baseball coaches before, but the example of a kid coming in your program and saying, okay, I'm going to go to school for 3 years, and then after my junior year, I'm going to get drafted and I'm going to sign. It's the most ludicrous thing I've ever heard, because if you're putting parameters around your life, you're just expecting that life is going to move in a directional certain way, and that's just not the way it is. We never expected anything to happen to Donnie Everett. You never expect anything to happen to anyone. You never expect that you're going to get injured. And I just think there's so much out there that it doesn't make sense to waste any time on thinking about things like that, when the only thing that really matters is what you're doing right now. Anything can be taken away from you at any point. March 13th, we're sending all these kids home. And you say, what do you mean we're sending you guys home? Well, we've got this huge virus, fellas, and it's bigger than all of us, and we can't play baseball anymore. So I think just to stay in your lane, understand that what you're doing right now has tremendous value. And if you immerse yourself in the relationships and the growth process of getting better, I think that's the only goal you need.
You've touched on it a couple times, the tragic passing of Donnie Everett in 2016, who was one of your players and I believe the number one recruit in the country coming out of high school, and someone who it seemed like all the players just really loved and cared for. Mm-hmm. How do you coach your guys through that? Not even as a coach, but just get them through that as a man.
That was a tough one, Colby. I mean, yeah. I think back to that right now, and it's still raw. And, I'm not the parents. Teddy and Susan are the parents, and they're very close to us in the program now. But I think you're just doing the best you can. I don't, I've spoken to a lot of coaches. I think you know what, you join a small group or contingent of people that go through it. And when it happens, it's almost like you find yourself talking to other people that it's happened to before. And I find myself talking to coaches, or someone connects me with a coach that it just happened to. And the best advice that I can give anyone is just give the players the face and the strength that they need during that time, so that they can try to work through it, because this is not going to be a daily, monthly, yearly thing. It's going to last a long period of time. It's a deep wound, and time is the only thing that can make it feel at some point livable again. But that took a long period of time. I mean, we didn't rebound from that. I remember the next fall for us after that happened to Donnie, Colby, that was the toughest fall ever. I mean, everything was slow moving. The kids weren't into it. There was a lack of energy, and it wasn't their fault, but yet you could just feel like our program was grounded. I remember going back to Maggie several times saying, I don't know if I want to go further with this anymore. It just doesn't feel right. And, I think there's times as humans where we all look at what we're doing and say, should I do this anymore? Maybe someone else should do it just to try to recreate a different style of energy. But we did. We got through it, and we actually had a pretty good year in 17 and 18 and, of course, 19. And I think the best thing about 19 is that the seniors who stayed, which there were great, a lot of them, it came around full circle to them. And I'm very appreciative for that happening to them because, you know, winning a national championship is just something that's so that's, you don't even, talk about that. I mean, if it happens, it happens, but that's just a 1 in a million chance. And we were just very fortunate, especially to that group. So I was happy for them.
Yeah, no, it's a nice way for them to kind of have a good bow on their finishing time at Vanderbilt and get through that. Were there lessons you learned from that just about grief and the resiliency of the players? And I just that's not something that coaches go through, and even coaches who don't worry about the X and O's, I feel like worry about psychology and that sort of thing. But that's a whole different thing to endure as a coach.
It is, because grief is its own monster. I mean, you feel like you can defend grief, but grief just comes in, it picks you up, and it just throws you around. It does whatever it wants with you because it's controlling your emotions, it's controlling your life, it's controlling your thought processes. And really, because it's so strong, because of the person whom you lost, it just takes over the energy of your days. And that's exactly what it did. Now, I had gone through that. We lost a captain when I was a coach at Presbyterian College when I was there, my last year prior to going to Clemson. And then we lost an incoming player back in 2009, which was devastating too. So I just think that it's one of those things that I think it hardens you. I think it thickens your skin. I think it certainly trains you to be very localized in your thinking in terms of what you're thinking about and how you're doing it, and how the value of people and how the value of what you have never gets distorted. I mean, there's not a day that goes by where I take what I'm doing right now for granted. There's not a day that goes by where I don't go to bed with my wife and think, oh my God, this is just going to be here every night. I never think like that. I think like this could be the last night. I'm not morbid, but it's just like, I just don't take it as it's going to happen. And so I think what's done to me is it's really helped me pay more attention to the relationship I have with my wife, the relationship I have with my players. There's some positives that come from it, but you'd rather not have to go through that in order to be enlightened about life.
Yeah, I cannot imagine. So I want to turn to your time with Team USA, and you were lucky enough to be an assistant head coach for Team USA baseball. What was that experience like, and what was that like to spend time with other coaches who are the best of the best that you're not around with on a day-to-day basis?
I loved it. I loved the late Mike Gillespie. I thought he was a tremendous person, tremendous man. He was so kind to Maggie and I, and such a mentor too. Such a short amount of time, I learned so much from him. And then obviously I built such a great relationship with John Savage at UCLA, who I really admire. I think he's one of the nicest people I've ever met, but he's one of the brightest coaches I've ever been around. And then certainly when I got to coach again in 2006 with Jim Schlossnagel and Mark Machtolf and Tom Slater, I just loved that experience too. You're certainly working with highly skilled kids, but you there again, you start to understand that they're highly skilled in the game of baseball, but they don't necessarily have everything figured out. And then that's when I think, to me, when you start working with kids of high caliber, you start to understand they're still humans. They still have much to figure out mentally, emotionally, and physically. So I just loved the experience. I thought it was to represent your country and to put USA on your chest, and to once again, and 2002, we've always had a tradition for the flag and the national anthem. But there again, it was just another reminder how important that is, because it makes you reflect on what you have and how so few in the world have what we have. And if we could just spend 2 days outside of the United States and other countries, we'd come sprinting back here saying, I can't believe I would ever bitch and complain about this when I know that what we have right here is the best in our world. And I know we're dysfunctional at times, but we also have the ability to take that dysfunction and grow from it. And that's what I've tried to pass along to the players.
I couldn't agree more, and I don't think I could say it any better. Recently talked with someone you just mentioned, Jim Schlossnagle at TCU, and he said that I had to ask you about a time you were eating ice cream with the staff and got upset about it and threw it out the window.
I was so upset because those were some of the best moments, Colby, because Slosh, me, Mac, and Tom would go to someplace and eat, and we'd sit down, talk shop, eat, have a great meal, and for about 2 to 3 hours. And then this one night we said, hey, you guys still hungry? We want to get something sweet. And said, let's go to it was Newport, Rhode Island, which if you have never been to Newport, Colby, you need to go, because it's one of the nicest towns in the country. Beautiful homes. We went to this ice cream place right down in the village, and I took one bite of it, and I just said to myself, what the hell am I doing? Because it was huge. I mean, if I ate that thing, I would have had a cardiac arrest. So I just took it, and I just chucked it out the window, and I said, I'm not eating this. And they just started laughing. I'll never forget that, because it was really funny, but I couldn't believe I was going to try to eat that thing either. I just made myself sick. It was just a bad moment. Talk about choices and decisions. Even an elder coach didn't make a good choice on that nutritional habit.
I love kind of your relationships with other coaches. We've talked about Slosh. When you won the World Series in 2019, you faced the guy you hired as an assistant when you first came to Vanderbilt. What did you see in him when he was young that you wanted to hire him, and what sort of behaviors do you think he did that were really valuable for him to grow and kind of keep getting more opportunities as time came along?
Yeah, you're talking about Eric Bakker at Michigan. I just thought when he came to Clemson, we had a volunteer job available, and I got a call from Keith LeClaire, the former coach at East Carolina, who died of Lou Gehrig's disease. He had played for Coach Leggett, but we just happened to be talking, and I told him, I said, Coach may call you, but we're looking for a volunteer. And he goes, I got your volunteer. It's a guy named Eric Bakker. He played for me. I go, I remember him. He said he's from San Jose, California. So anyway, we spoke to him. He came up, and when he came up to visit Clemson, he had all this agility apparatus in his trunk, and he was chiseled. He was strong, just like he is today. But that all he could think about was baseball and working out, and it was just like a fit. So I was with him with 1 year at Clemson, and then when I got the job here, I never forget. He said, Corbs, I want that recruiting position. And I said, I probably am going to have to hire someone with a little bit more experience. He goes, don't do that. He goes, I'm here. I'm the right guy. And sure enough, I got off the phone with him, spoke to Maggie, my wife, and I said, what do you think of Eric Bakker? She says, you know what? You can groom him. You can help him. He's got plenty of energy, and he did. And that's the best decision I made at that time. Just a guy who, even if a recruit said no to him, it was like he just moved on quickly. He was never going to concern himself with what wasn't available. It was always like, what is available? He was always looking ahead. So it was very easy for me to see that he was going to be successful because of his habits, because of how much he cared, because of his knowledge, because how quickly what type of mind he had. But I would say more than anything else, it's his care level and his energy for what he's doing. It's amazing. It's off the chart. So wasn't a surprise that he put his team in that position. in 2019. That wasn't an easy one to play from a personal standpoint, but our wives are so close that we knew we could get through that.
And then so James Franklin, the current Penn State football coach, was hired at Vanderbilt as a head coach for the football team when you were already there. Talk about how you guys developed a relationship over time and what makes him special.
He was just someone that came to the office right away, and we started talking, and we just connected. And he came in January, and their recruiting efforts were already in motion, but they had those recruiting weekends. And he said, I want you guys, you and your wife, to be part of our recruiting weekends. And I thought, geez, a football coach asking us to be part of their recruiting effort. He goes, I want you to talk too. So he'd get me up in front of the football players and talk about building the program and so on. And, from that point, Colby, we just became very close, and so close that following year, Maggie and I were going on road trips with the team. And I just loved his spirit for what he was doing. I'll never forget, we came into it, I think it was the second year we were there. They beat Tennessee, and he grabbed my wife and just jacked her up and threw her up against the wall. He was so happy. He didn't even know his own strength. And I'm thinking to myself, it was in the locker room too. And I'm thinking, this guy has so much energy. But I love James. I just love and Fumi. James and Fumi are close with Maggie and I. So that was a great relationship that stemmed from just our association right here.
I think his ability to come in too and be humble enough as the football coach. I think we all know that football in 99% of schools is the big program on campus, and just want to learn from you and leverage you is awesome. You've won 2 national championships now. I've seen coaches like Tom Izzo at Michigan State talk about they've won one and they just want to win one more, and that will help cement their legacy. Do you focus on winning more? Do you feel like you've changed what you focus on now that you have won them?
I think it changed on what I focus on now, just because of being older and just more experienced. I think the thing that you get lost in a lot is the success. Your ego can get in the way. You start looking at your program in a way that, okay, we've got to do this, we've got to do that, when in essence, that isn't really a good way to channel your energies, because it's much like goals. It's much like expectations. You're focusing on things that you don't really need to focus in on right now. I think the consistency piece of just operating in a consistent manner on a daily basis is enough. I think how I operated at Presbyterian College from a time standpoint is no different than how I'm operating right now. I think the biggest difference is how I think and what I put a focus in on. And the focus is more about the development of the players, how I'm going to perform in the classroom for a lesson, what we can provide for them for a training environment, what we can provide for them for a relationship environment. I think those are the things that I try to focus in on the most, knowing that once we get into competition, we all want to win. We're all competitive. But at the same time, those thoughts of winning and the torturous thinking of winning is more debilitating than it is prospering. It just doesn't, I found it not to be healthy in so many different ways. And in fact, it can drive you out of the game, and probably almost did on several occasions. So I think right now I think the difference is whether we won the national championships. I almost think winning those national championships, it's still hard to believe in a lot of different ways. I mean, they happened. I knew they happened, but once they did happen, it was like you wanted to get right back into normalcy again. You wanted to just you just wanted to get right back into life, a normal life. So I guess what they've done more than anything else is just continue to build my strength and growth for the game and the kids and where I am, and trying to understand that I want to be in this as long as I possibly can, and know if it was ever taken away, it would be a huge loss.
How do you try to work on your own personal growth? I imagine there's a lot of extra time right now with COVID in the past 6, 7, 8 months, whatever it's been. Are you a reader? We've talked about leveraging ideas from other coaches, but what else do you try to do?
I don't read books so much. I read, I'm probably more of an article reader. I'm not that smart. I'm not, I'm coaching kids that are a whole lot smarter than I. I pay attention and, I'm curious, but I think I would learn from other coaches, paying attention to things that I see, on the internet that I think will help the players. I don't watch much TV, and if I do, it's about sports. But if I was going to watch it, I only watch it to help the players. Otherwise, I'm not really interested in helping myself outside of working out. I mean, the working out piece is what I enjoy doing because I think it stimulates my mind and it stimulates at least how I feel about myself and probably good for my self-esteem. But outside of that, I just enjoy going out to dinner with my wife and sitting in my office and learning something, I guess, is really all I'm cut out to do.
What are you most proud of on your time at Vanderbilt?
Consistency and just, being here for 19 years. I think that and being part of a great university, and I say great because I feel like if you've got a program like ours, you just want to add to the university's wealth. You want to add to it. You don't want to take away from the university. And I think we're no different than any other program that they have here, whether it's medicine, whether it's business, whether it's human, organizational, and development. We just want to be a program that Vanderbilt looks at and say, okay, I know it's sport, but that's a very good program. It's well led. It's well attended. It's well thought of. They take care of their space. They respect their space. They like their environment, and it continues to grow. And I think that's the piece that I'm always proud of, is just the growth, development that continues to take place inside the program.
Coach, I appreciate you joining me today. I've got a few end-of-episode questions we ask all our guests. So the first one is, and I'll change this for you a little bit based on an answer, it's typically what's one book every coach should read, but maybe it's what's one book or podcast or documentary or show that you think every coach should go take in.
Well, I listen to Jim Rome because I like Jim Rome's interviews and I like how he thinks. So I'm a Jim Rome podcast person for sure. I'm also Michael Gervais. I like listening to Michael Gervais. I think he has some great interviews with coaches and professional people about talking about the sport or not sport, a lot of mental wellness stuff that I think is very interesting. Brett McCabe is another one who I listen to. And then there's a lot of NFL podcasts. I'm a big football guy, so I love football. So I will listen to Bucky Brooks and Daniel Jeremiah, anything that they put out in the NFL. I love how they speak. I love how they talk about players. And because it was COVID too, Colby, I was really immersed in that NFL draft. That really caught my mind. So that's probably what I do.
So what's one person you'd want to hear as a guest on this podcast?
I like Gino Auriemma. I like Brad Stevens. I think they're really, really good at what they do. If she was still alive, I'd want you to get Pat Summitt because I thought the world of her. If he was still alive, I'd say Don Meyer, former coach at Northern State, a tremendous person. But I think so much of Brad Stevens. I just think he's so even. And his name escapes me right now, but I like him a lot as a coach, the coach of the Miami Heat.
Eric Spoelstra.
Yeah, Eric. Yeah, I would listen to him. I think he does such a good job. I think he's so even. And I like your former basketball coach. I mean, he's going to coach again, Billy Donovan, but I think Billy's a great interview too. I love listening to him. I like a lot of basketball guys. I like Chip Kelly at UCLA. I think he's very, very sharp too. So those are some guys I would really love to listen to.
Great list of names there.
Yep.
What's one area you're looking to improve in over the next year?
My mind. I think just keeping my mind sharp. I'm going to turn 60, and I think the key is staying relevant to the kids. I think when you distance yourself from the kids because they look at you go, he doesn't really understand any of the music we listen to, or he doesn't understand how we operate and doesn't understand technology. If I get distant from that, I'm going to hang it up, but I'm not going to. I think technology to me is very important piece of teaching and coaching. Music is an important piece because it's a connective tissue between the coach and the player. It's not that I have to be overly try to stay cool. I'm not interested in doing that, but I do want to understand what they're listening to, and I do want to understand what they're about. I mean, I love these kids, and I just want to know what they're thinking about and what goes through their mind, because that's the only way I feel like I can help them.
What's popular advice you hear people say you think is wrong?
The grind. It's not advice, but it's just when someone says, "This is a grind." This isn't a grind. A grind is a terminal illness. This is a sport, and it's someone is actually paying me money, Colby, to coach college baseball. Can you believe that? And the money's pretty good too. So someone is paying me a decent amount of money to coach college kids in baseball. Who would have thought that? And I, in a million years, being 12 and 13 years old, as much as back then I wanted to be a teacher, never thought that was going to happen. So I just think grind is kind of overplayed. I just think that this is, if you're fortunate enough to teach and coach and someone's reimbursing you for it, you're not going to work a day in your life.
What's advice you have for young coaches who are listening to the podcast?
Just put your head down, and whatever position that you have, make it the best you possibly can. Don't look to the left. Don't look at the right. Don't look too far ahead of you. Just do whatever you can to make the kids inside that environment, make the experience and make the environment as good as it possibly can. And by doing that, it's just bettering yourself internally, externally, and understanding that you're a model of behaviors. Everyone is watching. It's one thing to talk. It's another thing to walk. And I think just modeling what you do and being the greatest form of integrity is very important as a teacher and a coach.
Last question, and I think we've obviously touched on this already, but what's the darkest moment you experienced professionally, and how did you overcome it?
Yeah, it definitely would be, the kids that we lost. Overcame it. I don't know if you ever do, but I think having a good teammate. I think having a good teammate and good wife. I think there's so much to be said about having a good teammate in life that you truly adore and challenges you in a way to make you better, to reinvent yourself, to challenge your thinking. And because of all of that, you end up loving that person more, because you understand that those challenging moments are ways to make you better, but make your relationship better. And I think that piece right there, as I said, there's always something good that comes from devastation. There is. And I think that's one of them, is understanding the relationship that we both have in order to get through moments like that, because my wife is very much a part of this program.
Well, Coach, I appreciate it. Thanks so much for joining me today. It's a great conversation.
Thank you, Colby. I appreciate the opportunity.
You've been listening to the Coaching Coaches Podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform and receive our world-class newsletter in your inbox every Sunday. You can access both of those at coachingcoaches.co. Once again, that's coachingcoaches.co.